I'll just be direct about it. They were asking whether or not masturbation was bad. They were asking whether or not masturbation with ejaculation was particularly bad. And here's my stance on this. I'm a biologist and a neuroscientist. A few years back when I started doing some public-facing education, I started getting a lot of questions, especially on YouTube, from young males about pornography and masturbation. And this becomes very relevant here. We have to remember that this dopaminergic system is generalizable to many different behaviors, right? Academic pursuits, sports pursuits, relationship pursuits, but fundamentally it's tacked into the adaptive survival behaviors, and every species, including ours, has at least two major motivations, which is to protect its young and to make more of itself, to make more young at some level. People can opt out of that, but one of the absolutely pathologic situations for any animal or human is to be able to access repeated dopamine surges without effort or any pursuit that's self-directed. So for instance, cocaine, a drug which potently increases dopamine, or methamphetamine, which potently increases methamphetamine, but doesn't require any sort of adaptive action pursuit except to acquire the drug and spend money on it. No sacrifice. So what ends up happening is the circuit that gets rewarded is only the drug-seeking behavior, and no other behavior will give the kind of potent dopamine release that cocaine or methamphetamine will, which is why they are so pernicious. Now, likewise, right. I'm not...
Well, plus they have that powerful reinforcing effect, right? So not only do you get that kick, but what's reinforced by the dopamine release is the behaviors that were right prior, particularly right prior to the ingestion. And if all that is the drug-taking behavior, that's all that develops.
That's right.
You build that monster inside your head.
That's right.
So I can see where you're going on the pornography.
Right. So I was starting to get a lot of questions. I was kind of surprised. I thought, well, I'm male, and maybe that's why they feel comfortable asking. But people were saying that we're asking about pornography.
Does masturbation cause erectile dysfunction? Does masturbation cause premature ejaculation? Is it possible to damage the penis through masturbation? These are common questions I, as a doctor, get asked every day. Before I answer this, let's start from the beginnings of sexuality. You see, from a developmental perspective, puberty is not the starting point of human sexuality. Intrauterine erections in boys happen from week 26 in pregnancy. Starting at the age of 2, humans develop an interest in their own and others' genitals. By the age of 6, they have learned that this is inappropriate behavior and stop touching their genitals when people are around. In childhood, one learns about gender roles. This is how men behave, this is how women behave. In childhood, we learn about romantic relationships. We listen to fairy tales. The prince marries the princess and they live happily ever after. We observe our parents, and so on. All of this is part of human sexual development. The onset of puberty is the natural onset of masturbation for most. Of course, this depends very much upon how many restrictions the environment puts on the individual. But in more open societies, it is a part of normal, healthy development.
Epinephrine, which is also adrenaline, those are the same thing, is literally manufactured from the molecule dopamine. If you look at the biochemical cascade, it is dopamine is converted into adrenaline, which is the basis of all energy, all neural energy. And so, including thinking. And so if one is not in a place of being able to set their goal on a particular lofty goal, a graduate degree, a book, etc., yet the way one gets to that is by completing things in their immediate environment from start to finish and closing the dopaminergic loop.
Those are at least micro-narratives, right? So they're not integrated across a long span of time, but they're not nothing. And so one of the things, well, I did write about this in my first book, particularly about putting your house in perfect order. It's like, well, if you're lost, one of the things you can do is look around and see what direction you could take locally.
The bigger the drop afterwards, and it's not that you drop to baseline, you drop below baseline. So again, it's not these things aren't good or bad, they just have to be controlled. In a way, because when people are pursuing dopamine peaks over and over and over, and they are getting them, typically it's because they've been pursuing that activity far too often. And you're saying perhaps take a break from that, and then maybe an ability for yourself, your system, to reset right. I mean, in theory, all the things that we're talking about with pornography could be superimposed onto food, or could be superposed onto real sex, right? That one also has to be cautious there, right? but the cycling back and forth between dopamine and low dopamine states. Dopamine fasting, as it were, but maybe just low dopamine states. These are natural rhythms that existed in the nervous system. We had to remember what the dopaminergic system is there for.
If an individual repeatedly engages in this circuitry, let's say masturbation and pornography, with increasingly potent forms of stimulation that are on a screen, a couple of things happen. First of all, what's being reinforced? What's being reinforced is a high dopaminergic response to watching other people engage in sexual behavior, which is very different than being in a first-person sexual experience. Okay, so right there, you know that what's being reinforced is not actually any kind of improvement in communication skills.
Voyeurism.
It's voyeurism. And as these questions started to come in more and more, I started to realize there was a lot of kind of undertones of people talking about fear of or experience with sexual dysfunction that clearly pornography can lead to. And here I'm specifically talking about males. I actually don't know the literature on females. So here I'm talking about...
Females don't use visual pornography to the same degree.
I see.
They use literary pornography.
I see. So...
Yeah.
So, and then you start to think about, okay, what happens in the cascade or the arc of sexual arousal and orgasm? What happens is that initially there's it's parasympathetically dominant, meaning if somebody is too stressed, they actually can't engage in sexual behavior. The arousal response doesn't occur. The erection is blunted, but the actual orgasm response and ejaculation is strongly associated with the so-called sympathetic nervous system, which has nothing to do with sympathy. It has everything to do with, it's a kind of a stress response. And then it reverses to a parasympathetic response. And a hormone called prolactin increases dramatically after ejaculation in males. What does that do? That blunts dopamine release and testosterone for a very long period of time, which makes sense if pair bonding and sort of, in our species anywhere, there's this idea that then other molecules would be exchanged with partners, pair bonding, potential for raising mates, etc. Without getting into a huge discussion about that, the point is this. Masturbation and pornography are potently tapping into the dopamine system and can undermine the very processes of which I consider healthy processes of finding a mate, dating, communication, eventually, if it's appropriate, sexual interaction,
etc.
etc.
Like it's undermining pair bonding.
I look at things through the lens of biology, and in particular through neuroscience, but some other fields as well. We have to take a step back and now, knowing what we know about testosterone and dopamine and all these things, and ask what is pornography doing to the brain? Well, first of all, it's triggering the release of dopamine and in the short-term testosterone by the observation of sex, not actually engaging in human contact. Think about the young brain being significantly more plastic and willing to rewire than the adult brain. Absolutely, there's no question about it, it's hyperplastic. And that person is getting dopamine and testosterone increases by observing sex, and not actually by engaging in human contact. Okay,